You can't arrest your way out of crime. You have to actually prevent it in the first place. You know, the problem is nobody's responding to this as if it is a national crisis. There isn't a prevention and a cure strategy, which is what we need. The government is worrying about many other things apart from what is happening on our streets, particularly in poor areas.
So do you accept you've lost control of it?
Well, I think, we're very clear that this is about a multi-agency approach. It's not just about policing. Of course, that's really important, but it's about intervening early as well on young people to make sure that they don't think it's normal to carry a knife. So, for example, we've got our #KniveFree social media campaign to really send that message out there. But we're also trying to take immediate policing action with the greatest of respect, to stop and search.
Well, that's twice I've asked you the question. You've declined to answer it twice about whether you've lost control. A hashtag is not going to stop young kids stabbing each other on the streets of this country.
Social indicators for violent crime among young working-class street gangs have remained consistent for 200 years. Relative poverty, masculinity, exposure to domestic violence, lack of education. So the solutions are fairly obvious in many ways.
The government's austerity agenda. In London, there has been a 36% reduction in youth service budgets since 2012, and a similar story nationwide. This has been blamed for alienating youngsters, pushing them into the arms of gangs.
It's an issue that families and young people and communities across the country are concerned about and want to see us tackling. And in the recent months, we've seen an appalling number of young lives that have been cut short or devastated by serious violent crime.
What you just saw there were clips from recent televised interviews and debates, such as the Knife Crime Summit held at 10 Downing Street on the 1st of April. This outlines the current government's approach to tackling knife crime, which is a social issue currently on the rise. The government's response to this issue is knife crime prevention orders and an increased amount of stop and searches, but many argue that this isn't enough. To counter the government's response, I believe that we need more youth and community development workers to create projects, empower communities and get hands-on with tackling knife crime. First of all, I'll be discussing the values and principles of what is ethical community development. A great quote from Nelson Mandela states that there is no greater service than to help a community to liberate itself. The National Occupational Standards for Community Development outline the key values and process of community learning development and community development workers. The key values of CLD are as follows: social justice and equality, anti-discrimination, community empowerment, collective action, and working and learning together. The process of CLD is outlined in a model from the National Occupational Standards. This process works alongside the key values of CLD and is as follows: engage with communities, collective action, collaboration, community learning change, develop an organisation and practice community development. This model from the NOS outlines key areas such as displayed. To be an effective and ethical community development worker, following the key values as outlined earlier is viable. Community development is different to other professions within the welfare or education sector due to its commitment to collective ways of addressing problems. As outlined by Gilchrist, community development strengthens society and tackles disadvantages. Social justice and equality is a value met through anti-oppressive practice, also known as emancipation, which is the liberation from social and organisational structures of oppression. Anti-oppressive practice is a skill required by workers in order to meet the aims of CLD. This involves anti-discrimination. Workers can meet this by taking into consideration the many different social theories and ideologies in order to conduct an ethical approach to tackling social issues such as knife crime to further empower communities. There are many different theories available for workers to take into account when focusing on an issue. Community development workers enable communities to do what they want to do. Workers must strive to build bridges over differences in order to empower communities. The act of bringing people together through collective action enables communities to focus on an issue which is important to them. As stated by Ledwith, collective action is the stage of community development that builds on critical consciousness as the basis of people acting together to bring about change for social justice. Critical pedagogy is something that I think would benefit CLD workers. It is, as stated by Ledwith, a form of popular education based on people's life experience by simply questioning everyday life's taken for grantedness, to see the contradictions that we live by more clearly in order to act for change. Muniz outlines in his book titled Youth Crime the concept of victimisation. People claim victim status whether or not they mean to. This status is claimed through age, gender, class or ethnicity. Muniz presents the theory of the ideal victim, which is someone who is vulnerable and defenceless. To be more specific, he outlines that elderly women and young children are the ideal victim. Victimisation is founded on social inequality and status. Background, religion, sexuality and other personal factors define how much of a victim one can be. This fits into stereotypes, especially when talking about crime. Muniz shows an example of this through the societal targeting of groups of children via curfews and dispersal zones. Quoted by Muniz, this enables age-specific victimisation and criminalisation of behaviours which would be ignored if practised by adults. The theory of victimisation links to how today's youth are routinely blamed for the surge in knife crime. This model from the Youth Justice Board states, the mislabelling of youth groups as gangs runs the risk of glamorising them, and that there is a public perception of groups of young people posing a problem.
What you see firstly is that this is not a new problem. Every generation pretends gang crime is a new problem. So when you look at the press reports they cite in their scholarship, it's this same sort of sense of moral panic, this unprecedented thing. When actually we've had violent teenage youth gangs for 150, 200 years, maybe even longer. And the social indicators of that violence have remained identical for almost 200 years. As have the
people who analyse it as a race problem.
Yeah.
These are black gangs, these are Asian gangs, these are...
This is fascinating. I mean, let's just look at the maths. There are 1.2 million black people in London. In a bad year, 50 of them will kill someone. That's less than 0.004% of the black population. Therefore, anyone that thinks that blackness is a sufficient common denominator for violent crime clearly doesn't even understand what a common denominator is. Just to contrast, in a bad year in Glasgow, say 2005, there were 40 murders. There were only 600,000 people in Glasgow. So that year, a Glaswegian as a whole was twice as likely to be killed as a black Londoner. Whereas the commonalities, when you actually look at the demography of violent crime, the commonalities remain the same in Glasgow, Liverpool, Belfast, Naples, or London. Racial explanations are sort of way out for the powers that be, a way out for the wider society. And it's revealing that what happens in London is black on black crime, even when the person committing it is like me, has one white parent, one black parent. Okay, what happens in Glasgow, race is not important, or Liverpool, race is not important.
So let's look at the way the government is...
Marxism is a theory which concludes that conflict will happen between classes. For example, the ruling class owns the business and the lower class work for the ruling class. This theory outlines that power is sort of shared through a top-down approach. When talking about societal issues and the contrast in power between government and people, this theory can be linked to policy and the power imbalance between young people and government.
So let's look at the way the government is responding to this. Money, on the one hand, into very deprived areas, which have become more deprived thanks to cuts, presumably.
For sure.
And also denying that policing has anything to do with it.
I'm not, on that, I'm not entirely sure it does or doesn't. Is there any evidence that more police in and of itself will reduce violent crime? Secondly, let's not always believe that violent crime as a whole is on the increase. In 2005 in London, there were 180 murders. Last year, there were just 116. So we have to be very, very careful that the information is accurate, one, and that it's not being used to sort of just say, right, more police is going to solve the problem.
But what do you say to the Bobby on the beat who's absent these days? Or when do you see a policeman on the beat?
Like I said, I don't think that's the issue. Having a police officer is not going to undermine the reason why some young people feel so desperate or disenfranchised or enraged that they are killing other young people. So you still need to get to the root causes of the reason, and the root causes are not going to be undermined simply by more police. You need to work with poverty, you need to work with domestic abuse, you need to work with different sociological and psychological factors, but I just don't think having more police on the beat is suddenly going to get rid of this massive...
But that takes money
problem.
And commitment. That means prioritising this end of crime.
And it means believing that the young people who are dying are important and valuable, and being willing to have a nuanced and human view of young people that do sometimes very, very bad things. When they come from a different sector of society, more affluent sector of society, or a more racially approved group, or at least if that's the perception, there is more willing to have a nuanced view of those people.
Can you...
I'm now going to talk about the essential skills and knowledge that I think that a community development worker should have. For example, being transparent in approach and conversation. Be approachable through relaxed posture, body language, clothing, and the vocabulary used. This can be done by researching slang. Find common ground by report building through finding out more about the person and by understanding the geography of the community through culture, environment, the services available, and social issues. Community learning development workers should also aim to reflect and have a plan. What is the aim, objective, and what will be the outcome? Workers must be aware of barriers and accelerators to working in communities, being aware of the following factors that may be viable to the role: time, lifestyle, contrasting responsibility, identifying stigma, funding through diversifying income streams, and mistakes. On the issue of knife crime, these barriers can be overcome by the worker researching and understanding the community and knife crime as a social issue, looking at government documents, policy, and understanding danger and prevention as steps to overcoming these barriers. By building rapport with community members, workers can share responsibility with members of the group and provide resources to enable communities to have their voices heard. Members could speak to local police force, local MPs and council members in order to create change and spark a debate on knife crime. Workers should be aware of how they want to make and inspire change. To gather a group on knife crime, CLD workers can attend political protests, speak with community members and young people, and attend youth panels and clubs in order to engage with the community and begin collective action and collaboration. Networking is a great way of establishing links with organisations and groups of people. Having a good network can help for sharing resources and exchanging information. This figure from Sapin shows different ways of bringing people together, more specifically young people. Sapin states that this can be done by arranging a public event, putting individuals in touch with each other, and by arranging shared activities. Sapin further states that conversations with potential members can build up their confidence and readiness to join a group. The Government Digital Services Community Development Handbook articulates that workers need to figure out who will help the community function, is already in the community, and needs inviting. The Cabinet Office has an online checklist for workers to use in order to assist community development. The checklist delivers questions for workers to ask themselves from a reflective point of view. The questions include thinking about how the members of the community interact with one another and areas where the community can go to share resources and knowledge. To appropriately organise a group, workers need to identify and understand the social problem that the community is wanting to tackle. They must then work together to gather knowledge and resources from the community, share it with each other, and to further network to create social change. This is done by proposing to the community spaces to plan and organise, events to attend, and share with friends and family, such as protests, talks, poetry performances, and murals. In the instance of knife crime, CLD workers can respond in different ways. Murals are possible public areas to stage talks or information sharing and gathering from within the community. They can also provide a sense of community strength and empowerment, which can benefit the discourse of the group. An example of a mural would be this one painted by Ben Ean with anti-knife crime charity, the Flaverson Trust. This mural was created in memory of victims of knife crime, including deceased members who were close to the local community. Once groups and communities have established action plans to create change, they are enabled by workers using the networks, knowledge and resources they have to carry their projects out. Projects can include creating murals themselves, such as the example I previously used.
Hello, St George's. Red Thread is a hospital-based violence intervention programme. What that means is we meet young people at the moment when they come into hospital, where they've been a victim of violence. Probably one of my most memorable young people was a young man who I met a couple of months ago who came in having been stabbed 16 times. And when we started to talk to him, actually this wasn't the first time this had happened. And in the moment that we met him, he was saying, "I'm ready to change." And after leaving hospital, getting into a housing unit, signing on, looking for work, getting himself into some therapy, he's saying to me, "I said I was ready for change and you guys believed me." And I think that's probably the most powerful testimony to the work that we do that I've ever heard.
It's not my role to investigate, it's my role to support and enable that young person. We're going to walk along with them for those next steps, if indeed they're kind of willing to take that.
Get on my stuff, get a job, get out there.
Okay, so if I can offer to you that we can help you out a bit with getting that job and getting you sorted with that, would that be useful?
Yeah.
Adult male trauma, 15 minutes.
An example of best community development practice I found was Red Thread. Red Thread on their website lists their vision, mission and values. Their mission is to empower young people to thrive as they navigate the challenging transition to adulthood by integrating trauma-informed youth work into the health sector. Red Thread bridges the gap between youth work, health and education. They currently lead 4 projects. Each project links towards youth violence and knife crime. Their A&E work includes a youth violence intervention programme. This aims to reduce youth violence and revolutionise support services open to victims of violence. They talk on their website about the teachable moment. This is a moment when young people are able to question and reflect on their behaviour and the choices that they have made which led them to the point they're at, A&E or the hospital bed. It drives to help young people pursue change that they haven't felt able to before. Chaos is another service by Red Thread, which focuses on giving support to young people admitted to hospitals. The support is flexible and changes depending on the young person and their needs. HIVE stands for Hospital-Based Interrupting Violence Exchange. It is a national network of services which assist existing and emerging hospital-based violence intervention. Finally, Red Thread have the Well Centre, a service available to people ages 13 to 20 years old. Their centres include a diabetes transition team and a youth panel with educational intent. They have youth health hubs. These give drop-in access to GPs, CAMs and youth workers from Red Thread. Red Thread have a clear focus on youth offending and violence and want to eradicate the stigma behind it whilst providing support and help that isn't provided by the state. This is what community development is all about and proves why Red Thread is a best practice example. As quoted by Gilchrist, community development promotes self-help and service delivery when the state is unable to satisfy community aspirations. Red Thread also work with MPs and councils to contribute towards preventing youth violence and knife crime. They contribute to the Serious Youth Violence Report in 2016, which examined serious youth violence within Greater London. Throughout the report, it's outlined that Red Thread's youth work teams work with around 50 young people who have been assaulted each month at each of their major trauma centres. Finally, in 2016, Red Thread outlined that knife crime is an important issue due to accounting for around 50% of serious violence cases.